In the early 20th century, Japan emerged from its long isolationist past to rapidly industrialize its nation. This transformation was driven by a desperate need for resources and a fervent desire for global recognition. The nation's military leadership, emboldened by early victories in the Russo-Japanese War, looked outward toward new horizons. They began to view the vast territories of Asia as essential spheres of influence for their empire. This growing ambition manifested clearly in the formal annexation of Korea and encroachment into the Manchurian region. Within Manchuria, the Japanese military sought to secure iron, coal, and agricultural land for their economy. These raw materials were deemed necessary to fuel the burgeoning industrial machine of a rising modern state. As the ideology of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere took root, it spread across the nation. It was framed by leaders as a noble liberation from the heavy yoke of Western colonial influence. Yet, this rhetoric masked a brutal reality of military occupation and the systematic subjugation of local peoples. The initial phase of this expansion was marked by rapid territorial gains across the Asian mainland theater. Military planners celebrated as they successfully established a series of compliant puppet regimes in conquered borderlands. These strategic moves set the stage for a wider, more devastating conflict that loomed on the horizon. The imperial dream began to cast a long, dark shadow over the entire Pacific region and beyond. Tensions simmered as the reach of the Japanese military grew, threatening the established balance of global power. Soldiers marched into new territories, believing they were securing the future prosperity of their home island nation. The industrial heartland hummed with activity, churning out steel and weapons to support the relentless territorial expansion. Every victory on the battlefield was heralded as proof of the nation's divine right to lead Asia. However, the cost of maintaining these far-flung outposts began to weigh heavily on the national treasury reserves. The puppet regime struggled to maintain order against the rising tide of local resentment and hidden resistance. Diplomatic relations with Western powers frayed as Japan continued its aggressive push into the heart of China. The promise of prosperity through the co-prosperity sphere seemed increasingly hollow to those living under military rule. Propaganda posters adorned the streets of Tokyo, depicting a unified Asia under the benevolent guidance of Japan. Beneath the surface, the seeds of a future, more catastrophic confrontation were being sown with every move. The ambition that had once fueled a miraculous modernization now threatened to consume the nation in flames. Military leaders remained steadfast, convinced that total dominance was the only path to true national security today. They ignored the warning signs, blinded by the intoxicating allure of rapid conquest and unchecked imperial growth. The stage was set for a conflict that would eventually engulf the entire Pacific in total war. History watched as the rising sun cast its long, ominous shadow across the vast, vulnerable Asian landscape. The path forward was paved with iron, coal, and the blood of those caught in the expansion. Factories in Osaka roared with the relentless demand for more ships, more tanks, and more munitions. The government tightened its grip on public discourse, ensuring that dissent was silenced by patriotic fervor. Young men were recruited in droves, their minds filled with visions of glory and imperial destiny. They boarded transport ships, sailing toward distant shores where the map was being redrawn by force. In Shanghai, the smoke of artillery fire choked the sky, signaling the end of fragile peace. The international community watched with growing alarm as the Japanese flag flew over captured urban centers. Economic sanctions were imposed by distant powers. Yet this only fueled the resolve of the military. They viewed the sanctions as a direct challenge to their survival and a provocation to act. The cabinet meetings became increasingly dominated by officers who favored bold, decisive, and violent action. Every compromise was viewed as a weakness, a betrayal of the sacrifices made by the soldiers. The expansionist policy became a runaway train, gathering speed toward an inevitable and violent collision point. Local populations in occupied zones faced the harsh reality of forced labor and resource extraction policies. The dream of a unified Asia was rapidly becoming a nightmare of control and systematic oppression. Communication lines stretched thin, connecting the far-flung outposts to the central command in Tokyo City. Intelligence reports hinted at the gathering strength of resistance movements across the vast occupied territories. Yet, the command ignored these reports, preferring to focus on the next phase of their expansion. The naval fleet grew in size and capability, projecting power across the blue expanse of ocean. Each new ship launched was a statement of intent, a challenge to the established naval powers. The atmosphere in the capital was thick with tension, a mix of pride and growing existential dread. Citizens were told that the hardships of rationing were necessary for the ultimate, glorious final victory. They endured the scarcity with a stoic silence, believing in the righteousness of their nation's cause. But the cracks in the facade were beginning to show, hidden deep within the bureaucratic records. The military machine required more than just steel. It required the total submission of the people. Every village and town was mobilized, their resources funneled into the insatiable maw of the war. The landscape of Asia was transformed into a chessboard where human lives were mere pawns. The strategic depth Japan sought was proving to be a logistical burden of immense, crushing proportions. They had crossed the threshold of no return, committed to a path of total, absolute conquest. The horizon darkened as the clouds of war gathered, signaling the approach of a global storm. The legacy of this expansion would be etched into the history of the 20th century forever. The sun, once a symbol of hope, now presided over a world spiraling toward total annihilation. The initial territorial gains soon collided with the interests of Western powers and fierce local resistance. Japan's reach eventually exceeded its grasp, leading to a catastrophic and inevitable geopolitical confrontation. The invasion of mainland China ignited a protracted, bloody war that drained the nation's vital resources. This conflict isolated Japan on the international stage, drawing deep scrutiny from global observers and rivals. Following the sudden attack on Pearl Harbor, the conflict expanded into a total, all-encompassing war. The theater of violence spanned the vast expanse of the Pacific, pitting Japan against Allied forces. Despite early tactical successes, the tide began to turn against the once invincible, imperial military machine. The industrial might of the United States began to dismantle the foundations of the Japanese Empire. Simultaneously, the resilience of occupied nations grew, creating cracks in the facade of imperial control. Supply lines stretched thin, and the economic burden of the war effort became increasingly unsustainable daily. The once confident military leadership found themselves trapped in a cycle of attrition and strategic failure. Cities faced relentless aerial bombardment, turning the dream of prosperity into a landscape of ash. The eventual defeat in 1945 brought a sudden and traumatic end to the grand imperial dream. This collapse forced Japan to undergo a profound and painful transformation from a militaristic, expansionist power. The nation emerged from the wreckage, pivoting toward becoming a peaceful and stable democratic society. Focus shifted entirely toward economic reconstruction and the healing of a deeply wounded national psyche. Japan sought global integration, carefully navigating its place within the modern and complex international order. The scars of the conflict remained, yet the path forward was paved with new democratic ideals. Diplomacy replaced the sword, and trade replaced the forced extraction of resources from neighboring lands. The transition was marked by the dismantling of old structures and the birth of new institutions. Citizens worked tirelessly to rebuild their shattered homes, turning their eyes toward a brighter future. The industrial capacity once used for war was repurposed to fuel a miraculous economic recovery period. Technological innovation became the new frontier, replacing the territorial ambitions of the previous dark era. International relations were redefined, fostering partnerships that would define the nation for decades to come. The shadow of the rising sun receded, replaced by the steady light of a peaceful nation. History served as a somber teacher, reminding the people of the cost of unchecked imperial ambition. The collective memory of the war became a catalyst for a firm commitment to lasting peace. Japan stood as a testament to the possibility of change after the most devastating of conflicts. The transformation was not merely political, but a deep cultural shift toward harmony and global cooperation. The Pacific, once a battlefield, became a bridge for commerce and cultural exchange between diverse nations. The legacy of the past was acknowledged, ensuring that the mistakes of history were not repeated. A new generation rose, unburdened by the fervor of the past, looking toward a globalized future. The reconstruction effort was a monumental task, requiring unity and sacrifice from every single citizen involved. Infrastructure was rebuilt with modern standards, signaling a departure from the isolationism of the previous century. Education systems were reformed to emphasize critical thinking, democracy, and the values of human rights. The military was repurposed solely for defense, reflecting a fundamental change in the national strategic doctrine. Economic ties with former adversaries grew stronger, proving that prosperity could be shared rather than seized. The world watched as Japan redefined its identity, moving away from the ghosts of its past. The transition was a beacon of hope, demonstrating that even the most fractured nations could heal. The imperial dream had vanished, replaced by the reality of a stable and modern democratic state. The narrative of the nation was rewritten, focusing on contribution rather than domination on the stage. The resilience of the people proved to be the most valuable resource in the post-war era. Every factory chimney that smoked again represented a step away from the tragedy of the war. The silence of the battlefields was replaced by the hum of productivity and the sounds of rebuilding. Cultural exchange programs flourished, helping to mend the broken relationships with neighbors across the Pacific region. The commitment to peace became the cornerstone of the new constitution, guiding every legislative decision made. The nation embraced its role as a responsible member of the international community, seeking common ground. The trauma of 1945 served as a permanent reminder of the fragility of peace and stability. Japan's journey from expansionism to integration remains one of the most significant stories of the century. The echoes of the past faded as the nation marched forward into a new, brighter era. The struggle for survival had evolved into a pursuit of excellence in science, art, and technology. The geopolitical landscape had changed, and Japan found its place as a pillar of global stability. The lessons learned were etched into the national consciousness, ensuring a legacy of peace for generations. The story of the rising sun's shadow concluded with the dawn of a new, enlightened age. The path was difficult, yet the destination was a testament to the human spirit's enduring resilience. The world recognized the profound change, welcoming the new Japan into the fold of modern nations. The imperial era was finally laid to rest, allowing the nation to breathe and grow freely. The future was no longer written in blood, but in the ink of treaties and trade agreements. The transformation was complete, marking the end of a turbulent chapter in the history of Asia. Peace had finally taken root, promising a stable future for the nation and its global partners.